welcome everybody to this that's a first for me, to give a session, a virtual session on a topic that is not a first for me, but the situation is a little surprising, and so bear with me. It's very abstract to be talking to my screen rather than to an audience of friendly faces. So I know you're friendly, but I can't see you, and that's a little difficult. Today we're going to talk about the job application package. As an introduction, I want to tell you a little bit about me, and then I want to hear if you guys have some pressing questions. You can start asking them. You can ask them after I've introduced myself. And then we can also keep some questions to the break. There's going to be a little break after the first part of the presentation. So you can also, you can ask a question, and then we'll see when I answer them. I might postpone until the break. And of course, you're always welcome to ask questions via the chat channel. All right. So a little bit about me. So I'm a senior scientific editor at Gladstone. I actually used to be a scientist at UCSF. I was a fly geneticist for many years. And, but I always liked working on text, on grants and papers. And so I got a degree in science communication at UC Santa Cruz, and have worked as an editor and scientific writer for many years now, and joined Gladstone a year and a half ago as a scientific editor. And yeah, so now I want to hear a little bit whether any of you have some specific questions about what this session is about. And some things, what I would like you to share is, if you have already started your job search and putting together your application package, where exactly are you at, or where are you stuck? So I'm going to pause here and listen to a few questions if you guys have any.
Hi, I'm Kieran from Dr. Jorge Palop's lab.
Yeah.
So I try to assemble my application package. So I have my research statement and cover letters and CV. I'm not completely happy about my research statement, so I'm revising it. I also don't have like any sort of like figure or graphical stuff in my research statement. I'm not sure if I should and what kind of figure to include.
That's a very good question. We are going to go over that. We're going to see some examples. I'll answer immediately that if you can illustrate, do it. You know, a picture is worth a thousand words, as they say. So if you have any illustration, by all means, use it. Especially, yeah, in the research statement, not so much in the cover letter. Yeah. Any other question? Okay. All right, so then I'll get going, and you can interrupt me, or you can just put questions in chat, and also remember that we'll take a little pause, and that will be a chance to ask more questions, or maybe just to stretch. Okay, so before I begin, I want to thank Sudha for inviting me to give this presentation. And Karina also for being here and you know, help me along to prepare this presentation. I want to give a big shout out to Lisa Accardi, our events manager, for putting the seminar together, for helping me with all the technical aspects of putting this video seminar together. So thank you, Lisa. Okay, and now I'm going to go about the plan. So, and you'll see that my plan illustrates some of the principles I want you to come away with. And one is that there's going to be an overview, and then there's going to be the details. So first, the first part is going to be an overview of the application documents, and then we're going to go into some details. Okay, so let's see. Okay, part one, overview. All right, so the whole package consists of your CV, cover letter, research statement, teaching statement, as well as recommendation letters, right? So depending on where you're applying, they might request slightly different things. You might not need a teaching statement, but roughly this is what you need. Okay, and so the idea is that all these elements of the package complement each other. Sometimes they overlap slightly, and they need to tell a story that is coherent. Okay, and so there are a certain number of messages that you need to get across through these documents. One of them is your great accomplishments, but also your bright future. It's important to convey that you're working on an important problem or research question, that you have good ideas, are creative, that you're independent, and that you have fundable short-term projects, as well as an exciting long-term vision, right? So these are the qualities, your qualities as a scientist, right? Now, before, when we were still at Gladstone instead of at home, I did a tiny survey of some of the faculty I ran into in the lobby about what they look for in applicants. And of course, they're looking for people who are accomplished, but they're also looking, they're really interested in people who have an interesting biological question. And as far as Gladstone people are concerned, it doesn't matter if it's medically relevant or not. It has to be an interesting biological question. They're also looking for candidates that display enthusiasm and drive, that can, they need to have an idea of what motivates you and what kind of colleague you're going to be, right? They, of course, want you to be independent from your postdoc mentor. They like somebody who is flexible and open-minded. And what's important also is they're looking for a good fit. Is the candidate going to be a good fit in my department, in my group? And of course, they also hate to see typos and grammatical mistakes or spelling mistakes. So be careful about that, right? Okay. So
I have questions for that.
Yes, go ahead.
So my name is Jay. I'm working with Karina. I'm staff scientist. How much of the independence they're talking about?
Yeah, a lot of my answers are going to be, it depends. Everybody has a different story. I think, it is something to discuss really with PIs more than with me. But I think in general, they don't want you to be competing with your former mentor, especially for grants and for publications, right? Because that would jeopardize your chances of success, right? So it's that kind of independence, I believe, right? That it's that kind of independence. Certainly another, message that I want you to retain from my presentation is that don't do this alone. I mean, show it around, show your application to people, and not just to your mentor, but also to other people, to get their feeling, to people who have been on recruitment committees. So to get their sense of what they, how you could improve your document, your application. I don't have all the answers about that, So yeah, it's a lot of, you have to build your story. You have to bring out your assets, and perhaps your whole career you're going to be collaborating with your former mentor. Why not? That's a possibility. Well, then show that it's an asset and not a liability. So it's a little bit how you. What matters is a lot how you tell your story and convince people that you're going to be successful at what you set out to do. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So here's a little summary slide here. But so the messages to get across have to do with you and your science. What kind of a scientist you are. But it's also a lot about who you are as a scientist and what interests and motivates you. And so that's another important message to retain. That, in particular, your research statement is not just a mini grant. It is something also about you that portrays you, explains who you are, what drives you, where you see yourself in the fairly distant future, so that the committee gets a sense of what kind of a person you are, what kind of a scientist you are, and not just what kind of papers you have published, okay? And so essentially, yeah, they are looking for a good fit, and so are you. Right? You are looking for a department, for a group, for an institution that is going to be a good fit for you, so where you can do the things that motivate you. And reciprocally, they are looking for somebody that fits with their grand plans. And maybe, I used to do this presentation at UCSF, because I used to work at UCSF. And, I've heard a lot of things. I mean, some PIs would say, I don't care what they're going to do. If they're really great, I want them in my department, right? Well, that's one position. And on the other hand, you also have some departments where, like, especially maybe in teaching, universities with an emphasis on teaching, they're like, well, I want a cell biologist who can teach, immunology 101. So that's very specific, right? And you don't have anything in between, right? So they might be building a new department and they want somebody who is going to take it in certain directions, and you happen to be that person, right? So there's this fit thing. It's not just about being the best, or it's also finding how we're going to work together, right? Okay, yeah. I keep wanting to. Okay. All right. So the first piece, the CV, the message that comes across from your CV is, I am accomplished, right? And I'm not going to spend too much time on that. There are excellent examples of CVs on the UCSF website with even annotations. So enough with the CV. Recommendation letters. Now, those are very important. The message that needs to come across is that the candidate is an expert and has great promise, right? So you need to find people to write your recommendation letters who know you for long enough and can talk about what makes you promising in their eyes, and can also speak to specific qualities like your independence, your creativity, your collaborative spirit, etc., etc. Things that you are also going to emphasize in your own writing, in your cover letter or in your research statement, and things that would interest the institution where you're applying. Okay. And also the recommendation letter, especially from your postdoctoral mentor, is a great place where the mentor can talk about how independent you are, or how you guys are not going to be competing, and so on and so forth, right? So for Jay, this might be a place where you ask Katerina to talk about how you're going to continue working maybe together, or how you're going to really take your project into directions that she's not taking. Okay. So yeah, recommendation. So in general, you need at least 3. And it's better to have recent mentors and collaborators as opposed to your graduate advisor or your undergrad advisor. Multiple institutions is better than all from the place where you're working currently. And then my recommendation is ask early, and also give your references talking points. Just, I mean, you could even ghostwrite the letter, but at least give them some sense of what you want to emphasize. Because remember, we're building a package where all the elements need to tell a coherent story, right? So tell them what are the assets, what are the things that you would like them to emphasize that will really reinforce the messages you want to get across, right? Show them your, even a draft of your research plan, and so on, to help them see how they can, reinforce your message, support your application. Okay, so start early, as in now. Okay, keep on going. Okay, now let's get to the research statement and cover letter, which is really what I want to focus this session on. So one message to take home is that there is a fair amount of overlap between what goes in the research statement and what goes in the cover letter. And the other message is that there's no cookie cutter recipe for how to make those. Different candidates do it a little differently. Again, what matters is that all the important messages be conveyed somehow, right? Research statement versus cover letter. Well, the first difference is the size, right? I mean, a research statement is 2 to 4 pages. A cover letter should be no more than 2 pages, right? In both cases, you are going to talk about yourself, your aspirations as a scientist. You're going to talk about your accomplishment. You're going to toot your horn. You're going to talk about your research interests, right? So there is a fair amount of overlap. Difference is how much, what proportion of the document you devote to all these things. And then, of course, a major difference is in your research statement, you're going to talk about your research plan in some detail. And in the cover letter, that's really where you show your fit for the particular department where you apply. So in general, people will have one research statement that is basically the same wherever they apply, but multiple cover letters, because each cover letter needs to be tailored to the particular job you're applying to, okay? Sometimes you might also tailor your research statement slightly. For instance, if you're applying sometimes to a more medically oriented department versus a more basic science department, you might have two versions of your research statement. That one that is more, medical research, and the other one that is more basic research. Kind of depends on your story. Okay. So, but in general, the cover letter is really where you tailor to the application. The research statement is probably more, is just really you and what you want to do. Okay. All right, so what's the purpose of the research statement? So some questions is who reads it, how much do they care, and how much does it weigh in the application? And again, based on my, my experience, it varies a lot. But in general, it's read by all the people on the search committee. How much they care, like I said, at UCSF, I've heard anything from, I don't care so much about what they put in the research statement as long as they are great. So how much it weighs in the application, unclear in the final appreciation. But, why you should spend so much time on it is because in the end, in a lot of cases, this is really the most important element of your application, because it's often the first opportunity you have to impress a search committee. Now, if you attended the former sessions of this Trainee-to-Tenure session, you've heard about applicants who had, or by the time they applied to jobs, they basically were asked to apply to the jobs. They had already a good idea of where they wanted to apply. They already knew people in the places where they were applying and so on and so forth. So that's ideal, right? So certainly your job search should not start with putting together your CV and your research statement. Your job search is starting already when you're giving seminars or slide presentations at meetings, etc. Right? So you're not completely starting from nothing. But and a lot of time you're going to apply, or hopefully, I hope you have enough of a network that you're going to apply for jobs at departments that already know you, right? But every now and then there's going to be jobs that seem interesting where, you don't have that many contacts. So your research statement and your cover letter are a chance to present yourself in a way that is very easy to grasp. Because the other thing is that a lot of people on the search committees are not specialists in your field, right? So you're going to need to talk about your work in ways that are easily understood by a broad readership, right? So, so this is definitely something you want to spend a good amount of time thinking about. You want it to be a good way to impress a search committee. It's maybe you're going to land you an interview. Certainly, it's going to be the basis for the phone or the phone interview. So think hard about what you want to put in it. It's also it's also kind of a blueprint for the next 5 to 10 years of your life as a scientist. So it's worth charting it out, right? It's a very good preparation for the Chalk Talk. I got that from Bob Maley. He knows something about the Chalk Talk. So this is definitely put things in there that you feel prepared to defend during your Chalk Talk. It's of course good preparation for grant writing. And even if that's not what gets you the job, as one applicant told me, it's a great exercise, because it makes you indeed think hard about what you want to do when you grow up, and how to best communicate it. And those are things that you're going to have to do constantly now and you've already been doing this because you've already been applying to fellowships and whatnot, where you have to project yourself in the future and to be good communicators. But this is even, even more so. And certainly if you embark on a career as in academia, you're going to have to write a lot, to think, to project yourself in the future, and to communicate a lot. So this is an excellent exercise for that. Okay. All right. So questions? Okay. I'll keep going. So the main message from the research statement is, I will succeed, right? So I'm accomplished. I have some research questions that matter. I'm independent. I have a short-term and a long-term vision. I can even identify potential funding sources. And of course, I have a research plan that holds water. Okay. Whereas in the cover letter, it's a mix of, I'm accomplished, I'm also promising, and I'm a good fit, right? So you're going to talk about all these things. And by good fit, how you show your fit, and we'll see an example, is by showing that you know the institution, the department, and the people where you're applying. And you show that you can identify opportunities to collaborate or to complement, what they have. You've seen the prompts in the job ad, and you can say, hey, you're looking for, microscopist. Well, I know a lot about microscopy. In fact, I develop microscopes or something like that, right? So this is how you show your fit. Now, what I put at the end here is be sincere and be authentic, right? And it has to do with you're looking for a fit, they're looking for a fit. But the other thing is you don't want to find yourself in a situation where, you're playing the numbers game. And of course, you have to do that to some extent, apply to a lot of places. So there's going to be at least some that respond. And then maybe you can play them up against each other to get a better package. I think it's Alfej who was talking about how, he found himself in a situation where, he had to say no to a place. And that was difficult. And so you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you lie, essentially, or you show more enthusiasm than you really have. And it's a difficult line to walk. But basically, again, the exercise there, or what you need to do is really think, do I want this job? Why do I want this job? And how do I convince myself and them that I'm a good fit for their job? Okay. Does that make sense? I hope so. All right. Oh, we're arriving at the break. So now is a good time to ask questions or to stretch. It's up to you. I'm here. I'm not going to stretch. So you can ask me questions. And we're going to take what is it? Yeah, we're going to take 3 minutes.
I guess I can go ahead and ask one question. Hi, Françoise. This is Juan.
Hi, Juan. Yeah.
So you mentioned about how you want to convey that you are a potentially definitely very successful applicant. And then my guess is different institutions will define success in a different way, right?
Yeah.
Can you maybe extend a little bit on that? Is successful means bringing in money or immediately publishing? Or I guess probably it's a combination of both.
Yes, certainly it's a combination of both, right? Yes. I mean, certainly, I think if you don't have a good publication record or, a good recent publication in a pretty well-ranked journal, it's going to be difficult for you. If you don't have a strong history of funding, and that can be particularly salient for foreign applicants, people who are not American and who, for instance, have not been able to secure any money from the NIH so far, right? That's a little tricky. That's something that maybe you want your mentor to address. And then also what I've recommended to applicants in this position is to use their research statement as a way to show that you can write something that looks like a grant proposal and that you know where you could apply. And so that, so that you don't appear as somebody who has not really thought thoroughly about funding. Does that answer your question, Juan?
Yeah, it does. It does. Thank you. Particularly the point about international applicants is it's a very good point. I guess going back to my original question, do you think that a place like Gladstone, for example, would define success differently than, say, UC Berkeley, which is more of a, like a traditional university rather than a research-only institution? Or if you're applying to a place that would require you to do more teaching, would that be different?
Right. So if you're applying to a place that requires teaching, you really have to show your teaching chops. I think nowadays you just can't get a job there if you don't have any record of teaching and success at that. So that's a very important point. And actually, I'm not going to cover teaching statements, but Sudha, I know, has a lot of information about that for everybody here who is interested. So that's one point. Now, I suppose that in a research, in a place like at Gladstone, I mean, yeah, if you're not a good teacher, it doesn't matter a whole lot, I suppose. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, Juan, how to answer your question.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But it's definitely food for thought.
Yeah. I think it's probably a conversation to have. I mean, Gladstone has a lot of great mentors. I think if you reach out to Bob or to Bruce or to, you know, and say, hey, you know, I'm just wondering how to present myself in the best way, I'm sure they will help you.
I will do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Françoise, is it okay if I add on a comment?
Certainly. Please, Sudha, do so.
Thanks, Juan, for asking that question about international students and funding as part of search committee. This is a conversation I've had with a couple of our faculty who are on search committees. One of the things that especially Bob highly suggests is, even if you don't have independent funding from at that point of application, they want to see promise, that you've thought through the process of the things that you want to, that you are applying for the ones that you're eligible for. And especially if you reach the point of having an interview, that you have considered all the eligible ones and you've made enough effort into identifying those. That shows them that as a candidate, you hold a lot of promise, apart from obviously your ideas and the research statement and how you're a fit and how collaborative, all of those elements. That's one thing I thought it will be helpful at this point. To your other question about difference between a UC Berkeley versus a Gladstone style research institute, just like Françoise mentioned, one of the key factors will obviously be teaching, because in an institution which has heavy undergraduate representation, they would expect you to be teaching some level of courses. So having some hands-on experience and a well flushed out pedagogy, your principle or your teaching philosophy is way more important than in institutions where you might not teach much. But I'm happy to provide some opportunities to experience teaching and get trained on that. Thanks, Françoise.
At a place like UCSF where there are no undergrads, right? So the teaching load is not, so UCSF is kind of intermediate between Gladstone, right? And although actually at Gladstone, people have joint appointments with UCSF, right? I don't know how much
that's correct
they're doing, but so how would you
get experience in that space?
Yeah.
So UCSF has an ongoing collaboration with SF State and a couple of the other universities in San Francisco, where every year there are multiple opportunities where you can apply to teach an entire course. So for a whole semester. So we have a couple of our trainees who have actually done that. In addition, if that's a huge time commitment and for a number of members that might not be possible, we give opportunities to lecture, to individual lectures, to high school and community colleges, those kind of opportunities, which is also a good effort to take on.
Right. So certainly a lesson to learn, I mean, for people who are at Gladstone, where we kind of become a little bit divorced from campuses with undergrads and so on, it's important to get some teaching credential, because you're probably not, I mean, most of the jobs out there are not like at Gladstone. I mean, there is going to be some teaching required of you. And so you need to have some experience. You need to be able to speak about what kind of a teacher you are and how you approach teaching, and even in some cases what classes you are comfortable teaching. Right. Okay. I didn't stretch, but I think, is everybody back on? We're gonna pretend that they are. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at actual samples. So, you know, I gave you the overview, and now we're going into really the more detail about writing the research statements and cover letters. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at a few samples, And I'm going to ask you to react to those samples. So you can do it in chat, or you can do it by, speaking up. Those samples were generously shared by some people who have applied. One sample actually comes from the UCSF website and is, more or less public. I ask that you do not copy those samples. You just look at them and you do not distribute them, right? That was the condition under which I obtained them from the applicants. And I've also whited out some of the information as much as possible. So the first we're just going to look at layout. And I want you to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's on a search committee who is looking at what, Sudha, 100, 200 applicants? And so, yeah, they're reading those statements and those cover letters from a lot of applicants. A lot of those applicants are not in their field. And so, imagine how they feel about that and how you're going to get your message across to them. Okay, so let's look at the first example here. And so I laid it out. It's I think it goes a little bit over 2 pages. I only show you two pages. So no need to read the detail, just look at it and tell me what you notice, what you like, and what you don't like. Any volunteer? Anybody on the chat channel? I can't see it.
No comments yet.
Okay, I'll give you 1 more minute, and then what we can do is look at the other one, and then once you see several, you'll have maybe more ways of talking about them.
Well, maybe I would say there's no images.
Yeah, there's no image on this one. Yeah, and what does that do to you, Christophe? Does it make you
boring? If I look through the 200, I'll just stop on the ones that have images.
Yeah, possible. Right. Okay, well, let's look at the next one. Any other comment on this one? Anybody?
One more. There's one from the chat.
Yeah.
I like the use bold to highlight important parts of the statement.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So that's an important thing to think about. Yeah. Use formatting to highlight some important things, like, for instance, the goal of my group will be to understand the molecular mechanisms underlying long-range control, or at the end of the essay, in the mid to long term, etc. You're showing your vision and where you're going to go. So you might want to, bold is a good way to highlight certain things.
Additional comments, Françoise?
Yes, Sudha,
I appreciate the space between paragraphs.
Yes.
But the sentences are too long.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So so the space, that's definitely something I encourage you to use. It's restful for the reader. Long sentences, yes, that happens. Yeah. Certainly one of the messages also is at the end, get help from an editor, and I happen to be one. If you're at Gladstone, there are 2 editors, my colleague Katie and myself, who can help you, and we can help you make your sentences shorter. And that's indeed, it makes it easier for the reader. Okay. Let's look at the next sample. All right, Christophe, you like this one better?
All right. It's too crowded around the images.
It's still tight.
Too crowded around the images. I also don't like the what's it called, the justified.
Oh yeah.
Text if the text is so if the column's so small and then the justified with all those holes in it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, now we know, and when we apply to Christophe's department, we know what to do. What not to do. Thank you, Christophe. I mean, I agree. I mean, you know, and certainly you're never going to find a format that pleases everybody, but you have to think about those things and think about what works at least for you and for the few people to whom you show it. And, you know, it's not hard to make adjustments to those things. We have another person, Kiyun. Hello. I see that Kiyun name is showing up on my screen, which seems to me means that this person wants to speak. No?
Sorry, I accidentally unmuted myself.
Oh. Yes, unmute yourself, please. Go ahead. Oh, she muted herself. Okay, great. Yeah, okay. So now, any other comment on this one? What do you think of those figures? Aside from the fact that maybe it's a little too crowded, at least to Crystal. What's interesting about them to me is that they're schematics as opposed to preliminary data, right? And that's something that I think is, you know, good to think about, because sometimes you can explain much more convincingly or certainly briefly how you're going to carry out your experiments with a figure than with text. So think about that. It's true for your grants.
Françoise?
Yes?
There's one question that came in the chat.
Yeah?
Is this a successful research statement? Is the question.
Yes, it is. Well, what's successful is the applicant. We don't know how they succeeded, right? I mean, the programmable package that's successful. Yes, all three samples are from applicants who succeeded. And so, you know, there's no cookie cutter answer. And you know, we need to think of the whole package. I do think that, yeah, this does feel a little dense and not as restful on the eye as others, right?
And this one has a more grant style with aims written out versus,
yes,
which is different from the previous one.
Yes, exactly. So the first one was more like a conversation, let's say, even though the sentences are long. Yeah, that one is more like a mini grant. And again, you're going to hear different people are going to give you different opinions about how you should do it. I've heard it all. I've heard that, you know, some people would say, yeah, I just want to see what their first R01 is going to look like. And other people say, oh, don't write it like a grant, because then people are going to get hung up on like one little aspect of how you want to do your experiments, and that might sink you. So I don't know where the truth lies, right? Let's say that if you write a very dense research statement, which maybe that's what you have, or you know, you're up against a deadline and you don't really have time to recraft it, make sure that your cover letter compensates and really extracts the big vision and speaks in a more friendly manner, so that they're not just like, oh my God, there's a dense cover letter and a dense research statement, and you know, and then I'm like, oh, you know, I can't really extract what this person is about and what the big picture is, right? So really think. I think you have some room to play, you know, between the cover letter and the research statement by, you know, complementing and compensating for certain things. You know, does that make sense? All right. Yeah, that's another example. Here, I'll just tell you. Well, one thing that I wanted to bring out is that in a research statement compared to a grant, normally in a grant, you know, you have one big project with multiple aims. In a research statement, you may have multiple projects because, yeah. So this is, you know, this is a person who's with different projects, and within each project, you know, he or she wrote multiple aims, right? But there's project 1, clearly labeled, and then project 2, clearly labeled. Okay, and here the figures have been removed because the person didn't want to share them. But yeah, okay. So I don't want to belabor the point, but you can see that there are different potential layout. Oh yeah, and also, I think what's very nice about this one is it has a title, which not everybody has, but I think it's a good idea. It gives, the title is a chance to give a sense of, you know, what this is all about, right? Also has some background information. How much background you give is entirely up to you, right? But, you know, labeling it like that is nice. It helps the reader decide, do I need to read this background or not? Well, maybe I'll skip it and move on to the next one, right? Or yes, oh, here's a background, I really need to read this, okay? So you're helping your reader by using formatting and so on, okay? All right, so the writing principles, you know, clear outline, chronological, thematic, formatted to reveal the outline and highlight the key messages, and using white spaces and illustrations, okay? And then another writing principle, and we're going to go into more detail about that, is, okay, so give an overview first and the details next, right? So that's what I was trying to do in my presentation, right? I gave you an overview, and now we're going into the details. Well, that's what you should do. And it's a good communication device to always give first the overview, especially for something complex or something novel that your readers don't necessarily know much about. Give them an overview and then give them the details. It seems trite when I say it this way. It's like, oh, of course, Françoise, we know to do that. Well, it can be overlooked, let's say, when we get down to writing. And also we get so caught up in the details, the very interesting details of our work, that we forget to give the overview, right? The other thing is...
Françoise?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, there was a question that came up. Is it okay to interrupt now?
Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead.
Shouldn't we first contact the selection committee or chair of the committee and find out what they are looking for? Example, if they are looking for a research statement that is more grand style versus more big picture, or is that inappropriate?
Well, that is a very interesting question, and not one that I've had. And then maybe I'm going to put it to you, Sudha. What is your impression? My impression was that in general, in the job description, they'll say what kind of application documents they're looking for, although they might not be so detailed as to say, you know, we want a research statement that reads like a grant, or we want a very high level research statement. So Sudha, what's your experience of that? Or
I actually don't think in the job description it would go to this kind of detail. Yes, obviously, yes, it would say a research statement. It might say outlining your plans for the next 5 years or so sometimes.
Right.
My personal take is it depends on your mentors, depending on how flushed out your ideas are and what comfortable layout you have. As long as you have the vision described fairly well. If it's in a grand style, I think it's acceptable. But they kind of want to see, as you mentioned, both the ones that can this person think long term? The vision, right, is it there? But also, right, are they good at brainstorming and troubleshooting and have thought through the potential elements of their aims? So it's the balance of that.
Right. And again, you know, in a research statement, sometimes they'll say 2 pages, right? Okay, well, 2 pages describing what you're going to do for the next 5 to 10 years. Obviously, you're not going to go into a whole lot of detail in the document. But in the chalk talk, they're going to need you on, okay, so exactly how is this experiment going to work, right? And what are your controls and stuff like that. So the point being that you don't have to put everything in your statement, leave some mystery for when, or leave some details for when you get to the chalk talk. But to get back to your question, you know, I suppose it's not wrong to contact somebody and say, hey, you know, I'm wondering what kind of research statement you are looking for, especially if they've been vague in the description. If you know somebody in the department, I mean, by all means. Certainly, if you know somebody, by all means, you should contact them and say, hey, you know, I'm interested in a job in your institution. Do you think I have any chance? Right, Sudha? That's something you need to do.
I agree. If you know someone, you should definitely take advantage of it.
Yeah. And so, you know, if you find out that indeed in that you know, there are some people on the search committee who really want to see, you know, something that reads like a grant. Well, maybe that's what you have to do. I doubt they're all going to be like that. So the problem is that, you know, on the search committee, there's going to be different people with different ways of using the research committee, the research statement. So it's a little difficult to.
There's one more question, Françoise.
Yeah. So
how important is it to know or communicate with someone from a prospective department before applying?
If you can do it, I think, you know, again, I'm not the best person to answer this question because frankly, I haven't been on the job market for a while, and this is not really what I do. I mean, I'm more in like thinking about, you know, how to communicate in a written form. But I believe that, you should, if you really want the job. If you really want the job, I think if it's in a place where you really want to be or for whatever reason, I think you should try to find out, contact somebody. Go ahead, Sudha.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, Françoise. We highly encourage us just as career coaches to try to communicate in the department of interest, more early in the stages of applying itself, just to see what are they looking for. Very often, as Françoise mentioned, are they looking, especially if it's, say, a school of medicine, how much of a basic science versus translational aspect they're looking. So having those initial conversations, I think, is really helpful to building or tailoring your application materials. So if there is a connection, especially if it comes through, somebody mentions about this position from a conference talk, it is absolutely acceptable to reach out to them saying, this is a position I'm considering. Any thoughts, any advice? So I think we highly encourage it if it's possible.
Right. Okay, so let's keep on moving. The other thing that's important is to sound personal and confident, right? So you are going to write about yourself, which for some people is difficult, but really you've already done it probably in your fellowship application where you talk about your aspirations and so on. So it's really, I am interested in and I will do things, not I might or I would or things will be done. It's I, right? Okay. So, So let's look at now in a little more detail. We're going back to some of the samples that we just looked at for layout. And now let's look a little bit at the language. And this is like this is the introduction to one of the research statements. Okay, so let's take a few minutes to look at it and then react. Okay, so anybody wants to comment on what they see here, what they notice, and what they like or maybe don't like, or think is what they think is effective and what is less so?
There's one question in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
It might not be related to this seminar, but if I apply for a fellowship, should I also use I in my application instead of we?
Yes, especially for a fellowship where you, it's important to show what you are doing. When you're a PI and you write about your lab, I mean, it's pretty obvious that it's probably not you, the PI, who is going to do all the experiments. But when you apply for a fellowship or for a job, it's very important to distinguish, to make it very clear what you are doing, you, the applicant, as opposed to the rest of the lab. So sometimes in the experiments you describe as a fellow, was an applicant for a fellowship, you are going to say we, because what you mean in that particular case is we as the lab, or we, me and my collaborators are going to do this. But most of the time it's I'm going to do this experiment. I thought up these ideas, etc. I want to become a faculty in a teaching institution, or so on and so forth, right? It's about you. I is okay.
A comment on this slide.
Yes. Yes.
I like the applicant is confident of what he or she is going to do.
Yes. My long-term goal is to define, and so on, right? That's pretty clear, right? Does that work for other people? Yeah, it's hard to have that conversation in, in a virtual seminar. I wanted, look what I did here. Well, actually, Teresa did that for me, but okay. We highlighted all the I or my references, right? So this is really about this applicant, what he or she has done and will do, and yeah, okay. I really recommend that stuff. I mean, it may not be as many I's and my's as in this one, but it's clear what these applicants, past contributions and long-term goals are, right? So use that. There are some other things about the wording here. So I have a long-standing interest. So this is a case of a person who has been working for a long time in the same field, basically. And so that's part of, okay, it's a she. That's part of her story, right? Now your story might be completely different, right? Maybe you started out as a stem cell biologist and now you're becoming a, I don't know, bioinformatician. Why not, right? And so you tell your story differently, and maybe you are not going to go back so much to what you did as a grad student ever again. So maybe you don't want to go back so far, in terms of showing your expertise. I don't know how you are. I mean, how you tell your story is yours and yours only, right? You just need to tell a story that shows vision, success, what drives you, right? So, okay. Yeah, the other thing is, see how this person also toots her horn. My work provided the first experimental support, right? To accomplish this, my lab will operate as the forefront of human genomics. Now, you might not like this language, right? Maybe you don't feel comfortable saying things like that, but you have to bring out some things that set you apart or that make your research particularly interesting. And so it's okay to be a little less objective or dry than you would be in a grant or in a paper, okay? Let's look at the other example. So here, this is the other sample. Okay, so I don't want to belabor the point. So this person is much less I in my face, right? The other thing in your face. The other thing is that this person starts with the science and then with his aspiration or his goals. And that's fine too. The bottom line is that introduction or overview of your research statement should talk both about your project and about yourself. In whatever order, it doesn't matter. But both, right? This is a way of encapsulating what you are, what you used to be, what you've done, and where you're going, right? So think about that. That's this overview. Okay. So yeah. So in your research statement, I strongly recommend that you start with this introduction, which is an overview. Other people call it an executive summary, and what you put in it depends again on the story you want to tell, right? But it needs to convey, who you are and what drives you. It may, depending on what they ask, they might ask you for a summary of your past accomplishments. So that's, one place where you do an overview of your accomplishment and of your expertise. This is your chance to toot your horn. So if, some of your paper, your paper has been reviewed in the New York Times, well, talk about it maybe, that might be something that you want to bring to list everything that's in your CV, but you may want to highlight some of the accomplishments you're most proud of or that you think put you in the best light for your job. bring out what your research question is or are and why they matter, because that's really important, right? And show your short-term and long-term vision. So you use wording like, you know, in the short term, I will blah, blah, blah. But in the long term, you know, I would really like to build like something. I don't know. This is also a good place where to show your independence. I don't think any of these candidates did it, but saying, you know, this project is entirely mine, and you can be very, very direct about that. And, you know, I have, I've developed this project myself, and, you know, I can continue on without competing with my PI on that project. And it's also a good place to mention potential funding sources, right? That you can say, you know, I've developed a research project, and, you know, on blah blah blah, whatever topic it is, and I have already identified, you know, several funding sources for it, and you can list them. Okay. So it's a little bit of a conversation, you know, and salesmanship. You know, this is who I am. This is what I do. This is how I'm great at it. Well, this is how I'm going to succeed, and so, and you know, some proof that I'm going to succeed, and I've thought about it without going into the details. Yeah, this overview and executive summary is a little bit like your business card or elevator pitch. It's also a module in a way that you can tweak. So, you know, if you don't want to rewrite all your research aims, but you want to tailor your research statement somewhat to different jobs, the overview is a good place to do it, right? And it's also, that overview is also a condensed version of your cover letter. So this is where the research statement and the cover letter overlap. You might go into greater detail about certain things in the cover letter. So, but yeah, we give a condensed version here, okay? So let's look. Now, let's look at how to write. Okay, any more question on that section? The overview. No? Okay. All right, so let's go into the research plan per se. So as we saw earlier, so it's good to organize it by themes, by aims, or even by chronology. You know, in the first 5 years, I will do blah, blah, blah. And then in the longer term, something else. It's similar to a grant proposal, but not as detailed, right? I mean, your grant proposal would be 6 to 12 pages. This one is going to be 2 to 4 at the most. It's very important to bring out why the work is important and to show that you have the tools to make it succeed, right? Keep in mind that when you summarize, when you have so little space to talk about your research, what you're not going to develop as much is the how, but you need to develop a lot the why and the what for. You know, why are you doing this? Why is that an important question to ask? And what would be able to do if we had the tools that you propose to develop, or if we had the answer to the question that you're asking, okay? So think about that. It's not just about the how. Of course, if you are developing technology, like, it's a little different, right? It's more about the how, but still, what is the purpose of this technology? What great thing is it going to allow you to do, right? As Sudha mentioned, you know, feasibility and alternatives are important. So, you know, give a hand, just like you would in a grant proposal, of like, well, and if this approach doesn't work, then I'll try another one, right? That's showing that you will succeed, because even if you run into a snag, you know, you have a plan B, and that's good to know. Now, again, you're not going to be as detailed as you would be in a grant, and leave some of the details for your chalk talk. Whet their appetite, right? This is a chance to whet their appetite. And then this is a good place to show novel directions and departure from mentor's work, even though it's informed by your previous work. It seems like a lot of pieces in the puzzle, but you can, I'm trying to bring out the important element of the narrative here. Right? Okay, where's my arrow? It's here. Okay, so let's look again at an example. So this is, again, one of the samples we already looked at. And the message here is how you know, give the overview before the details, and in particular, the rationale before the experiments, just like you would do in a grant, right? So the aim is very well formatted, like a grant, aim to classify non-coding regulatory elements, blah, blah, blah. And then it has this first paragraph, which is basically the rationale, right? And so one, underexplored cause, so that's the unknown. There's an unknown that we're going to try to fill. making it difficult to identify, okay, so there's an obstacle here. That's a good element of a narrative to, there's something difficult. So how are we going to overcome this obstacle? Another obstacle is that it remains cost prohibitive and so on and so forth. So this limitation supports the idea that functional genomic approaches are necessary. So she's, justifying her work because of all these problems and obstacles, okay? And then there's a hypothesis. Oh, wow, great hypothesis. Now that's a very good device, right, in scientific narratives. If you have hypotheses, bring them out. That really helps people, your readers, understand what it is that you're trying to do. That's very... Now, not everybody is doing hypothesis testing science, but if you have a hypothesis, bring it out. Okay? So that's the overview, that's the rationale, that's the why do we bother doing all these things. Always good thing to start with that. And then you can go in the details, right? And a good signal that you are now switching to how you're going to do it is to, right? To narrow the search, so this is a purpose. I propose to identify it. That's how I'm going to do it, right? But notice also how I propose to identify intergenic regions that are boundary. And then so again, here you give some sort of an overall overview of your approach, and then you go into the details of how you do it, right? So, and the way you're going to do it is I will create, I will transduce. Ultimately, I will also examine. So, avoid things are going to be done, right? The passive voice where it's unclear who is doing what. Here, claim it. You're going to do it. Of course, eventually you're going to have people in your lab doing it for you or under you. But, here, just say I. It's so much simpler. It's much more direct, and it's much more confident, okay? So. And then you can have a wrap up. Together, these experiments aim to and will help solve whatever problem I set out to solve, okay? So those are the elements of telling your story. And, in this case, I think she uses the figures as a way to illustrate her approach. So she doesn't spend that many words in describing her approach. It's all in the figures. That's a good device, okay? All right, so questions? So this is, if there are no questions, and because we want to go home soon, let's move on. Okay, so this is my little summary about what the research plan entails. So overview before details, informative headers. So headers are a very good way also of conveying your message in a very simple way, brief way that really hits the reader between the eyes. So think about your headers. It's the same as the aims in your application, in your grants. Craft your aims or your headers so that they contain an important message. So, I mean, it's okay to have a header that says the first 5 years, but it's even better if you say first 5 years determine blah, 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 right? There's much more content there. And it encapsulates one of your goals and you're done, right? You have, explain your goal in a way that really the reader will grasp. Okay, so informative headers, formatting to emphasize ideas. Use formatting in moderation. If everything is underlined or bold or italicized, then we can't see the forest for the tree anymore. So use it in moderation. Think of figures, especially to illustrate concepts and approaches, not just data. And be personal and confident. I will rather than experiments will be done. Okay. Oh, Sudha had suggested I compare and contrast research statement and K awards. So Sudha, please feel free to jump in and add what I may not have addressed here. So the idea is that your research statement is not so fundamentally different from a K award or even an F32 you might have applied to. It covers a lot of the same things, but again, what the difference is the length, right? In the research statement, 2 to 4 pages. K award, it's what, 12? And so think about the executive summary, which is 1 or 2 paragraphs. as stating your goals as a lab head. So it needs to have this gravitas of, or at least the expertise of somebody who's really ready to move on to the next stage, to be independent and running a lab. But it's similar a bit to what you have written in your keywords about your background, your goals and objectives, except that at the time they were as trainees, right? So now you really want to, but it's the same kind of language. It's again, projecting yourself in the future and describing what drives you and where you want to get. And again, the other point of comparison is between research, the two research plans in the keyword versus the research statement. And, again, the main difference is the length and the scope. For your research statement, you can project yourself for the next 10 years. For a keyword, usually it's no more than 5, right? And of course, in the keyword, you're going to have a very detailed background, rationale approach, anticipation of results and problems. Whereas in the research statement, you're going to need to stay at the overview level, really, because you don't have the space. But you need to have thought about all this stuff, this detailed stuff for the chalk talk. Okay, questions? Or Sudha, did you want to add something to this?
No, I'm good.
Good, thank you. All right, so let's keep going. Okay, so let's switch to the cover letter. We're almost at the end here, I promise. So cover letter needs to be personal and enthusiastic. So again, it's going to be a lot of I and my. It needs to be tailored to each job, right? So this is really where you can really go really show that you really thought about the job and how you would fit in their department. So it has to be about you, what drives you, what your accomplishments and your vision, but it has to be about them. That, by the way, is true of any cover letter. If you were applying to any job, if you apply to a job in the industry, same thing. Your cover letter, the cover letter is where you say, I'm really excited about what goes on in your company, and I think I have skills that would really complement yours, and so on and so forth, right? So a cover letter is always about them as well as about you. Okay, so and so yeah, you can highlight how you would be a good fit. This is also the place where if you know somebody, if somebody encouraged you to apply, if you've had several exchanges with somebody, even if they're not in the search committee, this is a good place to bring it up, right, Sudha?
I agree. I've had situations where I've had people who would talk about potential collaborations, areas of overlap, why they would make a fit. So they actually use that to show that as well.
Right. Yeah. And really, especially for the jobs you really want. I mean, again, you're probably going to apply to a lot of jobs, and it might be difficult to really tailor that much to everything. And also some of the jobs are going to be similar, so you can reuse the same cover letter. But the jobs you really want, it's really worth going the extra mile and showing that you really care, and and you really know what they do and how you could collaborate. It's very important to spell their names properly, and and to call their departments or their centers or whatever they are, really properly with no mistakes. But because that also shows that you care, that you really did your homework, and then they'll be interested in talking to you, right? So the other thing is keep it short. And one of the letter we're going to see was more than 2 pages. I don't know. I would try to keep it as short as possible. Again, it's kind of a dance. If the research statement, they ask for only 2 pages and you feel you have much more to say, well, then perhaps you can pad your cover letter with all the information you were not allowed to, or you didn't have room to put in your research statement. But, overall, keeping it short is always better because people don't have the time. And also, they get bogged down in the details, and so are you, right? If you can't keep it short, it's because you can't extract really what are the key messages that they should know about. So keeping it short is a good exercise. It's hard, very hard. But you're not alone, you get some help, okay? All right, so again, the cover letter is a place, so this is a sample, the place where you talk about your project and yourself, just like you did in the research statement. So this is the first paragraph, I'm writing to express my interest for the position of blah, 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 and I am currently a scientist at Gladstone. Look at that. My long-term research goal is to elucidate, and more precisely, I want. So then directly, immediately we talk about the project that this person has using I and my, okay? This is showing that you will fit. It's very brief in this one. I believe that my desire to decrypt the core molecular mechanisms that underlie gene regulation resonates with the blah, 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 your department. I anticipate opportunities for synergy with the many other groups. It's a little, in this case, it keeps it a little generic, many other groups. I mean, you could name specific groups, especially if you've talked to these people. You don't want them to find out that you want to collaborate with them when they read your cover letter. Maybe you should have told them ahead of time, right? And so on and so forth. And I look forward to the opportunity to share my work and ideas, etc., with a member of your department. Okay. So this gives you a little bit of the language for how you're going to show your fit. And the last writing principle that I want you to remember is to write in paragraphs with topic sentences. And this is just an excerpt from that same cover letter. It's one of the writing principles that you've probably all learned in middle school. My son is going through this right now. In fact, as we speak, he has a test in English right now where he has to write an essay with topic sentences. So, we all hear about those, but we forget to use them. And so, this is something to think about, especially in the kind of writing that as scientists we do. This is expository writing, right? Linda, this is not creative writing, but where we may not want to spill the beans, right? Here we spill the beans all the time. We tell them what we're going to tell them, then we tell them, and then we tell them what we told them, right? So the topic sentence is like announcing to your reader what this paragraph is about, right? So here, this is the same cover letter we just looked at. My long-term research goal is to elucidate. Okay, so this paragraph is going to be about this person's long-term, right? And then the next paragraph is, in my graduate studies with Professor so-and-so, I investigated. Okay, that's a topic sentence for his past accomplishments, right? And then next, this is a case of a cover letter that's chronological, right? So for my postdoctoral training, I joined the group of blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this paragraph, guess what? It's going to be about the work they did as a postdoc, right? Now, you could craft it differently and say, I have expertise in blah, 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 X chromosome inactivation. Not necessarily couched as what you did as a grad student versus postdoc, but in terms of your, by theme, or I have a strong interest in X chromosome inactivation. That would be a perfectly fine topic sentence if that's what you want to say, right? If that's what the paragraph is going to be about, okay? My future independent work, right, as a principle of a real build, et cetera, and then the paragraph, the last paragraph, I believe my desire to decrypt is how I fit, right? So remember that, paragraphs and topic sentences. And it's true when you describe your science. The first paragraph is about the rationale, the reason, these experiments are important is because we want to find out blah, blah, blah. And then, to determine, we're going to do this, that. That's a topic sentence for your approach, and then maybe at the end of these experiments, I will know whether, so that's a topic sentence for conclusion, interpretation, and so on, okay? So think about that, lumping or grouping the information in paragraphs with a clear topic sentence. That's the principle of communication that makes your writing so much easier for the reader to grasp, okay, or to understand. And even to skip. Maybe they can, I don't need to read about their graduate studies. I'll skip to the next paragraph, okay? All right, so we arrive at the summary. Okay. I'm gonna take a little breath here. So hopefully, you will remember from this session, first, that there's no one-size-fits-all package. Everybody has a different story to tell, so you can draw inspiration from other people's samples and experience, but you really need to develop your own narrative, your own story, and figure out what are the key elements that you need to bring out, what are the key stories that your references need to tell about you, and so on and so forth. This is really a very personalized package. Okay. The other thing is that indeed there are several messages that your application must convey convincingly, and those messages are delivered by different pieces of your application, you know, the CV versus the red letters versus the cover letter versus the research statement. But all these various elements come together, they complement each other, and together tell a coherent story. Okay, so to think about this. And then in terms of the writing principles, okay, overview before details. Write in paragraphs with topic sentences. Use formatting for emphasis and clarity. Use figures and white spaces. And, you know, writing is mostly rewriting. So your first draft is going to stink, and you're going to rewrite and revise and show it to people that you trust and revise. And that's okay. But that means you need to start early. You can't be starting your application package a week before the deadline. Okay. Now, the good news is you're not alone. You can get help. And I really strongly encourage you to get help first from your peers. People who are at the same stage, people who have been at this seminar and know, you know, what to look for. In fact, normally when I teach in person, I have people pair and share and exchange, you know, bring drafts of their writing, and then they show it to each other and they can comment to each other. You learn a lot about writing by reading other people's drafts and commenting on them and telling them what works and what doesn't work. Because once you've seen it in others, then you are able to reflect on your own writing, obviously, and see, you know, how maybe you could improve it. Of course, you should show your statement and your cover letter to your mentors, because, you know, it's obvious. Also, you want to make sure that you guys agree that indeed you can take this project with you, right? So it's very important to have had that discussion early on, right, Sudha? Have a talk with your mentor when you start going on the job market and delineate what it is that you're going to do, and that they're going to be okay with that. And then you can also get help at Gladstone from your Gladstone senior scientific editors, including myself, but also my colleague, Katie Claiborne. So we are available for you. So don't hesitate to send us your drafts, even early drafts. Personally, I like to work with people at the early stages of their writing, because that's where we can do a fair amount of brainstorming. So I know several people in the audience I've worked with, and we've done a lot of that. So I find that very useful. And even in remote, we can still have a Zoom session and talk about what it is that you're trying to do. And we don't have to just communicate in writing. All right, that's for getting help. And then any questions at this point?
I have one little question. What's your stance on like capitalization?
Capitalization of what? Okay, so Gladstone has a guide, what do you call it? A style guide that you can download. I can show it to you. So there are some rules for how to capitalize. Now, in terms of capitalizing titles, whether you capitalize, you know, every noun and verb in the title or not, it's up to you, as long as you're consistent.
Okay.
Yeah. Like here, yeah, I capitalized. Yeah, I don't always do that. But once you do it, you have to be consistent. That's part of showing that you paid attention. Okay. Let's see. So, okay, any more questions? All right. So I want to end with showing you a few resources. So obviously, you have Sudha and Karina here at the Gladstone Office of Postdoctoral and Graduate Students Affairs, is their website. And in particular, Sudha is happy to talk with you about how to get teaching experience, contribution to diversity and leadership experience. Oh, I forgot to capitalize experience here, see? So anyway, if you need more information about these and also information about how to get experience in those fields, talk with Sudha. The resources, okay, so yeah, the UCSF OCP, Office of Career and Professional Development, has a lot of samples for the academic job application. And so they have CVs, research statement, cover letters, teaching statements, some with annotations, so that's very useful. There's another source of resources and programs here, and some ideas also about teaching statements and diversity statements. All these slides will be made available to people who attended the seminar, so you can look at those resources yourself. Thank you for your attention and good luck.